My name is Nathan Hill and I'm a director of horror films. The two films I'm most well known for are The Strange Game of Hide and Seek and Tomboys. Hide and Seek is my interpretation of the classic Robert Louis Stevenson Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde tale, which I've interpreted, and Tomboys is an action rape revenge thriller. Particularly Australian, I would say not with Jekyll and Hyde because it's based on an English story. So we interpreted that the way it should be done, English style. With Tomboys, however, it's extremely Australian, very Australian, set in the outback, 5 country girls taking a serial rapist hostage to seek revenge, and that's very Australian. Yeah. I'd probably have to say there are certain creatures and whatnot that pop up often. There's a lot of dangerous wildlife here, so the drop bear or the razorback, even crocodiles, pop up from time to time with your creature features and stuff like that. Dangerous snakes and spiders and whatnot. But then there's always there seems to be the crazy bushman that will pop up. So, for example, in Wolf Creek, there seems to be a classic sort of archetypal character of a crazed bushman. The ingredients for a good grassroots horror film, I would say, comprise of a standout villain. Obviously, you've got to have a lot of blood, and preferably something that's original, although you do have to borrow from other horror films. Every time you make a horror film, it's trying to reinvent the wheel somewhat, but you do have to have a standout villain, whether it's a stalker or a madman or... the characters that spring to mind for me are like the original Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and what's the fourth one? God, I've gone blank. Oh yeah, Friday the 13th. So your standout kind of madman, I think is a good one. Yeah, I think the zombie genre has been exploited much further than I thought it would go. After 28 days, I thought, okay, wow, there'll be a couple, and it seems to have continued on. I know even here we've got, there's a National Zombie Day where everyone dresses up as zombies and parades through the city. Now there's a zombie response team that dresses up with water pistols and whatnot and goes out and shoots these people for real, and I know the guys that do all that. The zombie genre seems to be never-ending and quite possibly the most popular because it seems to keep reinventing itself, which I found odd. After a lot of the zombie films that came out of like the 60s and 70s, I thought that genre would probably die, but it just keeps going. So I'm amazed by it. I think movies that break the rules of your horror films. So like you're saying with vampires, you have to have fangs, you have to have a certain amount of blood, ladies whose necks are going to be bitten into, etc. When you reinvent the wheel or you come up with an original horror film, it has to be so striking and so original, which is one of the hardest things to do, really. It's risky. There's only, from what I've seen, there's only been, maybe half a dozen of them in the last decade that have seemed to have pushed through, like Saw would be one. So yeah, again, very hard, and you've got to get it right, With a big budget, with a Hollywood budget, I'd have to probably reinvent the films I've already done, because a lot of the films I've done have been on those lower budgets and they've been deemed independent films. With the budgets to get them right, that's one thing I'd do. Or I'd probably grab some of the other screenplays that I've written that have got the bigger budgets. Like I have a classic version of Jekyll and Hyde, which I've been trying to get made for several years. Then I've got another film which is in the satanic horror realm, which is more of a Rosemary's Baby remake. So there are those bigger budgets. So personally, I'd probably jump at the chance to make any of them. More money means more power, but not just that, the ability to get the scale of the productions. So, like, for example, something like Tomboys, I've got 5 girls in one barn with one guy that they're seeking revenge upon. If I had the budget, I might have had more girls, more guys, more police involved, bigger location. So it's all about scale. So having to scale it down is what gives you your limitations. But with a bigger budget, obviously, you can really explore all of your mind and try and get that whole world made in front of you. I suppose horror for me, because it was what I was brought up with. I have a grandfather who was projectionist for the soldiers in World War II, and he used to show all of the old horror films, the black and white Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Vincent Price movies. So I used to watch all of those as a child, and I was engrossed by them and was fascinated by, I suppose, the screen itself, you know, the medium, and how you could get all of that information on the screen in front of me. And how could I do that? Horror is a great genre to start with, because you can get a reaction from an audience without having to have that much money. You know, I mean, obviously, if you've got a lot of blood and the right scares and the right villain, you can get a reaction. So, and that's what all good horror filmmakers are looking for. They're trying to get a reaction out of the audience, and they're trying to play with their emotions. So that's why it started with horror for me. My family and friends refer to me as kind of the horror guy. So, in fact, even in school, I dress up a lot and do some outrageous things, and they used to call me the gore freak. So I was known for my horror as a child growing up, and it was totally accepted because, luckily for me, my family's very artistic and very creative, so it was always accepted. It was never never something odd or something wrong. It was completely normal. As long as it was artistic and I was happy, that was okay. The perfect example I have is that in grade 6 they had an Easter bonnet parade where all of the kids get dressed up as the Easter bunny and parade around the school, and I came as Jack from American Werewolf in London, who'd been completely dishevelled by a werewolf. I rocked up thinking that was normal and something fun to do, but there were certain parents, some of the other kids, that sort of pulled my mum aside and said, "Is your son okay?" Some of them actually thought I'd been in an accident. So it was kind of, I suppose, a compliment to my makeup at 12 years old. That's what I was into. What scares me? Okay. What scares me, I would say, not so much your blood and guts films anymore. Obviously, I'm in my mid-30s and it takes a lot to scare me. The re-release of The Exorcist did scare me. There was one scene where they had the spider walk. I got a fright from that, but I think it was more about the sound impacting with the crash zoom of the vision. That always seems to give me a fright, which is great. But what really scares me nowadays is more your psychological thrillers. So like the works of David Lynch, The Lost Highway, characters that have inner turmoil going on and you're not sure which way their drama is going to play out. So when it's more a mental fear that gets me scared, as opposed to just your sort of blood and guts, blood in your face type stuff. There's many subgenres in horror itself. Ones that spring to mind are your creature features, your splatter movies, your slasher movies, then your vampire films, your werewolf films. There's so many different genres within the genre. And obviously horror can split into your more generic genres. So nowadays you'll see dramatic horrors, or you'll get comedy horror. Comedy horror has obviously been around for a long time. It does split into different genres of film. What I'd like to see in a documentary about grassroots horror is, where is horror going in the future? At the moment, film industry is very competitive with everything being 3D. When you go to the cinema, there's always a big need for your comedies and your dramas and your action films, whereas the horror films, they're usually the least amount of movies coming out, definitely at the cinema, that is. So it's hard to say where it's going to go. Over the years, I've seen horror disappear and then come back, which has been amazing, but it'll usually be a bad horror film that kills the genre for a while, and then it takes a genius to reinvent the genre, come up with a good movie, and then you'll get a whole string of horror movies again. So I guess I'm curious as to where it's going and what people are going to make. Hollywood's successful in reinventing older genres. For example, now there's a couple of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movies that are going to come out, and they're doing another Dracula film. So you sort of think to yourself, how do they do this? But they do manage to do it, and they do manage to pull it off. So I think it all comes back to good writing and the need for it in the general public. I know with some studios, say for example with Universal, some of the first films they made were like The Wolfman. So every decade or every 20 years, you'll see they'll reinvent that film to stay true to their studio. So it's like there are certain genres of movies that will always be reproduced, I think, for as long as the system's in place.